Welcome back to the Common Good Show, a program that celebrates a fundamental truth. Life is a beautiful gift, full of blessings and trials, learning experiences, and opportunities to grow. This is a show that celebrates the little yet profound influences in our lives that add value, improve our outlook, and encourage us to appreciate everyday blessings from God. These are the conversations that contribute to highlight the common good, as told through the experiences of our guests. All of our guests share an unwavering commitment to their faith and the acceptance that they are at their very best when God is put first in their lives. What is the common good, you might ask? Simply stated, it is the sum total of social conditions that allow people, either as groups or an individual, to reach their fulfillment in its entirety. With me today, I have a fantastic guest who I'm thrilled to introduce to you guys, Natasha Lovely. Thank you so much for spending your time with me.
Thank you for having me.
Gonna hit it off with our basic question.
Go for it.
Our special question. Nothing basic about it, but it's our regular. Is there something in your everyday life, whether it doesn't have to be big or small, but that serves as proof to you of God's continual faithfulness, something that people might look at as just kind of normal, but to you it's really like that proof there?
So it's not one specific thing, but rather like a series of things that happen throughout the day. So I'm doing what's called the 19th annotation. So it's a retreat in daily life. It's St. Ignatius's spiritual exercises. And they were meant to be done in 30 days, but you can extend them to like a year. Or I know people who are doing it 2 years. And so the way I start my day is I have like 45 minutes of prayer, and then you obviously like go through certain things of the exercises, but one of the things you do is, what started this way, you ask and you voice your desires to God, and then at the end of the day you reflect and go into examine for like 10-20 minutes of how did he meet those desires today, or how is he meeting them if they're continuous, and more importantly, how did I respond, how did I react? And so it started off, you voice your desires, and now I'm like learning it's more, okay, God, what do you desire from me?
The slow transition.
Yeah, the slow transition. And I've been doing this for almost a year now. And every single day, without fail, in those moments at night when you're doing your examine, I see God's hand in the smallest of things, or like sometimes they're very obvious. Sometimes, like the other day, I was walking my dog, and I was thinking about something for work, and I'm like, okay, God, like forget the desires I voiced this morning. I just need a sign that we're moving in the right direction, and what we're doing is going to serve you and serve our clients. And through the corner of my eye, I see this little terracotta pot with this olive branch popping out. And olives are very significant in my life, like so much so my ring is an olive branch. And they just always have little messages for me. And I'm just like, oh, that's pretty. Took a picture, got home, and in my exam, I was like, oh, God, I got you. Like, that was my sign that you're there, that you're in this, that you're working your hand. And so really, it's like there are little things every day that he's doing for every single one of us, showing us his faithfulness and his blessings and his workings. But we have the responsibility to also like open those lines of communication and recognize them.
There's something special, and I forgot to mention it at the beginning, but you are the founder of Olive and Aspen as well. And there's something special for you behind the olive.
Yes.
And you mentioned it with the ring and whatnot, but do you want to build on that a little?
Yeah, for sure. So I own a personal branding agency called Aspen and Oliva. Aspen means, that's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. So Aspen means God's gifts, and the olive is a symbol of peace and abundance. So when you're using those God-given gifts and talents of yours, naturally God is going to, if you're using them in the right way, bless you with peace and abundance, not just monetarily, but just abundance in your everyday life, like spiritual life, and joy. So at our company, what we do is we help women for now, hint, hint.
Maybe something else.
Maybe something else down the pipeline. We help them architect, refine, and master their personal brand. And through that, we look at personal branding much more holistically. It's not just your logo, it's not just your resume or your website or color palette, but rather it's those moments of encounter and experience people have with you. Like, your brand is so much more than just a digital entity and a digital element of you. Like, you are your brand, how you're living your life, how you're articulating who you are in every which way, from the way you pour your coffee in the morning, hopefully it's Guadalupe coffee, how you get dressed, how you greet people, like all of that is your brand and who you are. And if you're very in tune with that and you've mastered that, like, only good things are gonna happen.
Right.
So.
What was there's a big, I'm trying to figure out how to say it, but personal branding is such a big thing, especially nowadays.
Yeah.
Because with social media and everything, it's grown to the size where, you know, everyone is thinking about their personal brand and whatnot. For you yourself, and we've talked about this a little bit, but I want to discuss it again and kind of build on it. What was that driving force that kind of led you not just to look at your self-image and your personal brand in that light, in that aspect, but actually to go on and found Aspen and Olivo, because you're like, hey, like, I see this need in people's lives?
Yeah, so actually this probably is a good lead in into the jackhammers and hummingbirds.
By all means, I'm glad we're getting there, because that was good.
Yeah, so the premise is that there's two types of people, and I can't take credit for this. I actually read this somewhere. I can't remember where I read it, but there's the jackhammers of the world who their point A to point B is very clear. I always think of athletes. I think they illustrate it very well. My preferred sport is soccer, so I'll use a soccer player. So most people know
I
Christian.
didn't know you played soccer.
I love soccer.
Okay. I
Yeah.
gotcha.
Come World Cup season, my friends and family
That's
know
all.
that summer, that's all that's on TV,
I respect
and
that.
is where my head
I
is
respect
at.
that. Sorry, continue.
So I think most people know Ronaldo. He is a total jackhammer from the time he was 12 up until now he's in his 40s. Just everything he did was building this skill and this mastery and his craftsmanship in the game to be arguably one of the best players. I'm a Messi fan, but
we won't
can
get
argue.
into that. It's all right.
And I mean, that extends far beyond athletics. You can be a jackhammer in any respect, right? It can be in business, it can be in arts. And then there's the hummingbirds. Hummingbirds go from tree to tree, flower to flower, just seeding this foundation of something totally new. So hummingbirds cross-pollinate. They build on the beauty of the flower that's already there with something new, or they create something that's never been done before, right? But their path is certainly not linear. And that can be in people as well. Like I'm a total hummingbird. I started off in the design world and fashion, and then I transitioned into a clinical therapist, and then I transitioned into a travel influencer, and then I transitioned into a digital marketer, like freelancing.
Honestly, it
digital
seems
marketing.
pretty linear. Like,
It is very linear, right? Super vertical. And in all these things that I was doing, little did I know, like at the time, I felt really lost, like, oh my gosh. And I'm sure my family was like, okay, here she's going from design to she wants to be a therapist, and now she has her own business. And little did I know I was seeding the foundation for what I'm doing now with Aspen and Oliva. Like, I would have never been able to work with the women that I work with in the capacity that I do had I not known and understood those principles of design, and then went on to be a therapist to really like understand how you communicate with people, how you extract things from people. Those just like those little toolkits that you have as a therapist, right? And then I freelanced digital marketing for a while. Like, I would have never known how those would have been weaved together. And then I kind of had a breakdown moment in the time that I was in this influencer space.
and this is, I think, to preface it, because obviously you shared the story with me, I think this is like, it's one of those things that I shared with you a little bit. I kind of went through my own version of it, but I think there's a lot of people that are sitting on the fence in you, where you were.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really good. And I'm glad you're sharing it with us.
And I think it's, again, I see so many people going through it, and friends and just people on the outside, is like, social media is tough. And you get I mean, we are just in constant consumption mode. And I got very sucked into it, working in it, and I was traveling to all these places. I was getting these dream contracts with companies that I could have never imagined that I would have been able to work with, but I wasn't living life. I wasn't present in moments. I wasn't experiencing things. I was doing things for the acknowledgement of other people and for very superficial reasons, right? That really weren't benefiting anyone. They weren't benefiting me. They weren't benefiting others. They weren't helping like propel this mission that we have forward. And one day I came home, I went to my mom's office, I'm like, I'm done. I feel like I'm not enjoying life. I feel like I'm not living to my potential. I feel like I'm not using the gifts God is giving me in the right way. And I feel like the influence of the outside is diluting who I am. Like, I will do things just because I think that's what will get good engagement, or that's what people will like. And I think that's the key. Like, we can never, in this digital world that we live in, allow ourselves to be diluted by outside influences. And that happened. And
it's so easy for it to
it's
happen.
so easy.
Because you don't, it's never the type of thing where you make the decision like, all right, so now I'm not worried about my vacation in Italy. I just want to make sure I get the good photos for Instagram. You're like, the whole time it's like, no, I'm here and this is great and this is, but I don't know what the technical term is, but the reel that's playing in the background isn't be in the moment and enjoy this.
Right.
It's, which angles look nice, what's the background, all sorts of like.
Yeah. And that shines through, whether you're an influencer or not, that comes through. Like, it comes through if you're you or if you're not. And I think right now, especially in the world we live in, we have to give ourselves that permission to genuinely be who we are, because that is what will radiate beauty, and that's what will captivate people in this sea of, like, I want to say, like, carbon copies of a multitude of things.
Yeah.
And I had a spiritual director one time when I was going through all this. He told me that, and I think I told you this too, like, there's that trend on TikTok where God is like pouring all the things, like he gave me height, he gave me a sense of humor, but he forgot athleticism.
Right. There's some good ones.
Yeah, there's some really good ones. I don't know what the trend's called, but I'm sure people can find them. And he was just very direct, like, Natasha, God gave you very specific, like, this perfect recipe of gifts and passions and talents with your personality, with who you are in this world for this specific time to do something with it. And he was very blunt. He's like, you're insulting God if you're not using it for the good of other people. And I wasn't. Like, I was just copying what I thought was the thing to do in this, like, digital world. And so I had a very, like, hard exit out. I'm not, like, a super emotionally expressive person. I think if I've cried, like, 10 times in my life, that's probably the most. But I just remember walking to my mom's office, and I could just feel the tears. And I was like, oh, no, like, this means something is wrong. And, like, I just knew it was time to step out of it, and I didn't know what was next. And I think if you're a hummingbird, there's a lot of, like, let go and let God situations in your life, and just trust as you're moving to different trees and flowers. And I didn't know what I was going to do next. And so I started freelancing digital marketing and personal branding. I was like, oh my gosh, like, that's it. Like, we're missing the point of personal branding. Personal branding is not what you project on your social media feed. It's not the typography you choose. Like, how you live your life, and that is your personal brand. And if people could understand that, then just imagine, like, how much impact that you would serve the world with, right? And it is true, like, we each have our own recipe that God designed when he created us, and it's perfect for this specific time. And if you're not living that out, it is like insulting him in a way, right? He put you here for a reason. And that is kind of what seeded the foundation of Aspen and Oliva.
I love that. And I heard, to build off of what you're saying, of how built for this specific time, it's not my original thought. Somebody else was talking about it. But he was just that reminder of, he's like, hey, listen, like, it's no accident that you and I are here right now, like, in today's day and age, doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Like, yes, and you having that background in therapy and really getting deep into the weeds with a lot of this. People deal with all sorts of stuff. But God has designed us, like, he knew that Natasha would be sitting here on a Friday morning or early afternoon, and that he knew the circumstances of the culture. He knew what people would be needing. He knew your hummingbird and what you were going to be doing.
Yeah.
And he's built you for October of 2021, and for the next day, and the next day, and every single day after that.
Yeah.
And I think it can be easy when all sorts of stuff happen in the background. There's that overwhelming pressure, and then you just kind of fall into the trap, and you forget that, like, no, I'm made specifically and designed for this purpose, for this reason.
Yeah.
And for today, and maybe purpose is overstating it, because I think a lot of people, myself included, have struggled with that, like, what's my purpose? But knowing that I've been called to and been designed for today by the perfect designer, the perfect creator.
Yeah.
And while you're talking about, like, presenting, social media isn't for like how you want to present yourself. Like, the most authentic version is just who you are. It always makes me think of the fake smile.
Yeah.
Like, you can tell when, and I've experienced this with friends of mine who are, like, trying to grow their social. They'll post a bunch of photos that they look great, lighting's this, the color's this and that. But then there's that one photo they post of their cousins or with their family, where it's just unadulterated joy, and it's never striking a pose. It's always in some weird, like, it's just something's happening, but you see the look on their face. You see them in that moment, and you're like, that's you.
Yeah.
All these other ones, they look great, you might have got likes, but that's you.
Yeah.
And the fact that, like, when the first time you kind of told me about Aspen and Oliva and what you were doing, even though I got it wrong, I remembered what you guys did. I was like, man, there's such a need for that. And it's just one of those things that it's so pervasive, and it's not just, like you said, it's not just influencers. It gets to everybody.
Yeah, it gets to I mean, whether you have, like, 2 followers or you have hundreds of thousands, I think that's the other thing in our culture, that in this digital social media world, is, like, we think we have to be doing these grand big things, or we have to have this platform of, like, 1 million people. But the reality is that whoever you are, you have a platform, and you have influence, and you have impact. Whether it's one person or it's 100,000 people, it matters. You never, like, that ripple effect is so powerful. All you need to do is plant that seed for one person to then create, I mean, a huge wave of, like, a multitude of people. And so
the butterfly effect is real.
Yeah, it's totally real. It's so back to your thing about images. I was talking to someone the other day, and we talked about the same point of, like, authenticity is so easy to not capture, but to recognize.
Yes.
And it's always in those images that we think of, like you said, you're with your cousins or you're with your friends. It's never the photo that you like the most is never the photo where you're all, like, perfectly posed. It's always the one that was captured just as everyone's leaving or just as everyone's laughing, because that's who you really are.
I posted a couple photos for my sister's birthday back in March or whatever, and it is in March. I know exactly what it is. But back in March, and the first one is honestly, I think they're all great because I caught her at very unsuspecting times.
Yeah.
But there were 2 in there that she was like, "Oh my goodness, you posted those," and I was like, her name's Abigail. Everyone calls her Abby. I call her Abigail. But I'm like, Abigail, like, those are the most beautiful photos. Like, you look stunning in them, and this and that. And it was, she was like, the recognition of, like, well, she was also kind of like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where, like, it's easy to see, no matter who it is, like, authenticity and someone being genuine, and it doesn't take, and when you see it, you know it.
But even more, like, what that communicate, like, those images that you posted of your sister, like, I'm sure to the people seeing them, that communicated joy and, like, a sense of livelihood, like, her family and love, and that probably meant so much more to the person who was viewing it, or, like, sparked a thought or something, than if it was just like you were all sitting
Happy
there
birthday.
smiling. Yeah, that
that
communication's really powerful when it comes through authentically. But I think sometimes we have to give ourselves the permission to, like, genuinely be who we are.
I want to build on that.
Yeah.
Giving yourself permission to build on who you are. Being a hummingbird. doesn't always go hand in hand, because when you're constantly moving from one thing to the next, and it's not cynical or not inherently cynical, but people want to know, like, you want to know and understand your friends and family.
Yeah.
And I've experienced a little bit of this from everything you've kind of shared here, but also told me, as you moved around to different things, did you experience any sort of like pressure or stuff from your family and friends? And then in what way were you like not carrying the weight of like, this is what they actually think of me versus who I actually am onto your next thing?
That's a really good question. I don't think anyone's ever asked that before. So I will say I'm very fortunate that I have a family who's like been very supportive of my hummingbird tendencies.
That's
the
nice.
only caveat is every single time I would jump from like whether it was design to therapy or therapy to digital marketing, my mom would always stop me in my tracks and say, before you jump ship, think about what lessons you learned, what you can extract from this experience, what challenges you faced, and how you grew from this, so that you can take those and build upon it in the next thing. But like, by all means, go for the next thing.
She was almost inherently asking the same question you do every night. We
Yeah.
just try to reflect on it.
That's true. I never thought about that. That's true.
But
Oh,
sorry,
go
continue.
Mom.
She was on it.
Yeah. But certainly from the outside world, from like other family members, I remember two very specific instances that were really.
We won't name them.
We won't name. No. Of course not.
I got
No.
you.
Although they probably will know. But it made me stop and think. So I'm grateful for the fact that they like kind of played the advocate, like devil's advocate for a moment. I had one of my cousins one time. I went through a period where I was like, I'm going to be a missionary. Like, forget everything else. Like, I'm just going to travel the world and be a missionary. And I remember my cousin looked at me from across, we were at Thanksgiving, and he's like, Natasha, all your education and all your experience, like, wasted so that you can, like, go and just give up everything and go do so. I was like, well, first of all, there's a lot we need to unpack there.
That's a big sentence.
Yeah, that's a big sentence. But it kind of stopped me, like, oh my gosh, like, I've dedicated so much time to this career path, to my education, to this and that, and like, yeah, I'm just gonna throw it all away and just go do this. But it kind of stopped me for a moment. Like, how do I use what I have now and bring it to something else? And then I had a close family friend who called, and it was really out of the blue. And they said, literally the first thing, when are you going to get serious with your life? And this was in the middle of like my influencing, like travel blogging, adventure, hummingbird phase. And I was like, what are you talking, like, I am serious.
Right.
I have it, like, this is my job. I'm making money. I have this platform where I'm able to use words and images and like visuals to impact people, and hopefully like I'm doing it in a way that like is serving God and like bringing them closer to Him and helping them find their purpose and mission. But you get a lot, as a hummingbird, you get a lot of eye rolls and a lot of like, oh my gosh, this person has no idea what they're doing with their life. And I think for me, what really helped was, one, like I said, my mom was always very supportive of this tendency, and she would always say, like, I would tell her when people would say like little comments about what I was doing, or like when I wanted to go from therapy, I started business school, and people were like, what? And she was like, don't pay attention. Like, if you are truly doing this because you know that this is what God is calling you to do, whether you know the point B or not, like, you know it's the right thing. If there's a sense of peace, then just do it. Forget other people. And
Mom knows.
Yeah, Mom knows. And easier said than done, right?
Very.
There are certain moments in life where I've had those breakdowns, like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But I also know that now it all makes sense. So with Aspen and Oliva, it started about 2.5 years ago. When you reach that like point B as a hummingbird, there's this sense of peace that you know can only come from God. Like, never in my wildest dreams could I have envisioned or imagined that I could do what I'm doing now, and taking all of those things that I learned, like my love of design, my passion for people as a therapist, and put those into one to create what we've created as a company, like I know that can only come from God. I would have never been able to architect this myself.
Greater than we could possibly ask or imagine, right?
Yeah. And I think as a hummingbird, there's so much like trust and let God, but also being very intentional about listening to him. Our relationship with God is like any other relationship in life. Like it has to be a two-way street. And that's hard because obviously God is not like present, like he's not physically here and we can't like see him, but he's
It's
still
not Dan talking to Natasha.
Yeah, it's not like he's sitting across from me. But it has to be like your relationship with him has to be like that. It's two ways. And if you are not willing to understand and open those lines of communication, it's going to be very hard as a hummingbird to find your point B. But he'll lead you there.
He'll get there.
Just have faith and ignore the eye rolls and the comments. And if you're doing it because you know that, if there's a sense, I guess I'll say, if there's a sense of peace, that, and you know when it's like, okay, this is right, or like, oh no, like this is God, you just know, follow it.
Yeah.
Because you might not know in the moment, but you are seeding the foundation for, something so great.
I think the conviction of the Holy Spirit is a very real thing. And for a while, when I told you a little bit about this, but when I was pursuing music, it was definitely there from the start, but I just ignored it. I was like, oh, this is, it's just one of those like nerves, you're starting something new, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't have to be good. You don't have to even like know what you're doing in terms of going to God in prayer and building that relationship. Because I read this somewhere, I don't know where, but it basically said, nothing we do in terms of reaching out to God in prayer is ever us initiating. It's always us responding, because God is continually there for us, asking, hands out, reaching for us. And so anytime we reach out to him, it'd be like you offering to, I don't know if you have like a little niece or something, but like offering like, I'm always here for you, and just waiting, and then one day out of the blue, then they need you and they call to you. And that feeling of just like, I've been waiting for this, I'm so like, I'm here for you. That time's infinite because it's God. But it was one of those things where, don't worry about doing it right. Don't worry about how you're going to pray, because whatever you is, God's already reaching out for you. He just wants you to come to him.
Yeah. And
so when, as imperfect as it can be, and mine was far from even remotely close to good, let alone perfect, the conviction of the Holy Spirit is there. And it guides you. And you may get to a point where it's so overwhelming that it stops you. If you're not listening. I'm curious, as a more of a hummingbird style, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and Matthew McConaughey was the guest, and he...
Oh, I love it.
It was so good. And when we spoke on the phone, you mentioned green light, right?
I may have.
Okay.
I may have. Yeah, I've read it a couple of times. I may have.
Okay, I was saying, I literally started this morning.
Okay, it's really good. It's funny.
Phenomenal. It is funny. But he mentioned on the podcast last night, he's like, we falsely assume that we're going to get to a point where we have it all under control. And we know what's going on. He's like, we don't. It's not going to happen. But we all desire, we love the thought of that. And I ask this coming from a place of like fessing myself, like I made this mistake. At different points in my life, I would get to somewhere where I'm like, this is what it was leading to. Which is great, because then you can see like, okay, this is how God's working. But I forgot that wherever I was there, like, oh, this is where I'm leading to, that is also leading to somewhere else. And so with Aspen and Oliva, and obviously it's a beautiful culmination of everything that you've been doing. Were there any like big moments? Of course, changing different career paths and whatnot. Those are pretty big. But was there any particular challenge? This is two parts. Any particular challenge that, walking through it, you just didn't see the other side at all, but now you're like, thank heavens it happened that way? And second part, where do you experience that feeling of like, oh, this is it, I've got to figure it out, versus where do you think that actually stands in the grand scheme of things?
That's a good question. Okay, I'll start with the last question you asked first. So I was actually thinking about this the other day too, of like, actually it's right after we got off the phone, I went home and I had lunch with my mom and I was like, Mom, I like never reflect, like literally everything that I've ever like expressed a desire to God, whether I wanted to be a designer and then I wanted to be a therapist and then like it all worked out. And then I think it was her that asked, she's like, okay, well, what's next? And I was like, oh my gosh, like what do you mean? What do you mean what's next? And yeah, like I would say I know that I still, hopefully, God willing, have many decades ahead in my life. And I'm certain that this is seeding the foundation for that. Like, I'm forever a hummingbird for that next season or that next chapter, right? And do I know what that is? No, like, I'm so happy where I am, and I see the good that's happening through the people that we work with. But I also know, like, this is helping me for the next thing, for the next way I'm going to serve him. What that is, I don't know, but I know it's going to be good.
But you're here right now.
Yeah,
and
like let go and trust God, right? And so to the other question of like, were there any like really challenging moments where I was like, oh my gosh, like what? Help. I definitely, when I was in the transition between therapist and like the influencing digital marketing space, I loved what I did as a therapist. Like I absolutely loved it. It was challenging, it was hard, and there were things that I would experience with my patients that, I pray that no one ever experiences. But it's reality, and I love, in a weird way, like if anyone's a therapist, like you'll get, like you just like it. And
it's a little dark.
It's a little, I know.
I'm kidding.
But there's like, I don't know, you like the other side when they come through.
It's like, not to interrupt real quick, but it's one of those things where real fullness of life comes from connecting with people.
Yeah.
And in a estranged way, you connected with those patients on a level that they probably never would have imagined they would even be capable of after what they experienced.
Yeah.
And so like I can totally see that.
Yeah, that's a great way to articulate it. Perfect.
But sorry.
No, that was great. And it was so I was 23, literally like the dream job at the dream hospital. I was making more than my supervisors had at my internship. She was like, take the job, like climb up that, like that is like perfect. There was an opportunity for me to travel and work abroad at a new clinic, at a new hospital, and like perfect. And then for whatever reason, like I would just feel this pull and like, nope. And I'm like, but I love what I do and this is working and I'm good at it and I'm helping people. And like I could just feel like God was pulling me in a different direction. And then I was pulled into that like freelancer type business, and there are a lot of challenges that come through having your own business and freelancing. And as a therapist, like we don't learn the business side of things in school or on the job. There was like a lot of on the job training. So there were a lot of challenges there, but again, like so much of it, and we've all experienced it, but it's a matter of like, are we intentional about recognizing it? Like God is working, right, in those challenging moments, and you just have to trust him. And like, look out for those little things that he sends you throughout the day, because he is communicating with every single one of us in our own, like I know people, I have a friend who God communicates with her all the time through license plates, and I've been with her when it happens, and it's the coolest thing. Yeah, it's so funny, because she'll get like the perfect license plate of like, it says exactly what she needs to hear. And for me,
that's so cool.
It is really cool. I wish mine were as direct as that.
Right.
But it's like learning and growing in that relationship with him. You'll learn your love language between God and how he communicates. For me, it's always in nature.
Hummingbird,
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, there's definite, but again, just like let go and trust God. As hard as it is as a hummingbird, but then also like take those experiences, and there's so much beauty. Like don't forget about that present moment. Like it's so easy as a hummingbird to be like, I know this is not what I'm supposed to do, but I know I need to be here. But be present, extract those lessons. How are you growing? what do you, like, what's the impact that you see happening? And then how can you take those seeds for the foundation of what's next, even if you don't know what that quite is?
Looking at what's next and taking what you've built, and even if you don't know, has there been, 2 or 3, whether it's individuals or concepts or ideas or books or whatever, but has there been like 2 or 3 mentors or guides as everything changes and you don't know what you're going to bring on, but like there's these couple things or these people that you've really kind of made a North Star, aside from God, through that whole journey?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really big into mentorship and coaching. And so for every season of life, like, I always ensure to have someone that's going to help me move forward in that particular time. But if I had to choose like one person, it would be my spiritual director that I have now, who again is like very supportive of my hummingbird tendencies. And every single time we end our meetings, it's always like, stay the course, stay the course. Even if you don't know what it is. I think having that person like spiritually in the back of your mind and like championing you in that way is really powerful. He actually, a conversation you and I had about your ears and how you filter through.
Yes.
So when I was going through these transitions, one time he told me, you really need to train, like, your eye is a muscle. You have to train it to see truth and to see beauty and to see good. And in a world where we're like constantly bombarded with content and information, you have to be able to filter and train your eye to see that goodness and that beauty and that truth. And you were telling me how your ears do something similar. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I can build off of it. So that was something that I just finished that book this morning, but before the Matthew McConaughey. But yeah, your ears, so you technically, from a biological standpoint, you hear sounds twice. They hit your outer ear, and then when it's actually translated in your inner ear, and all the hammer in it, and the whole dynamic of it. But essentially, the reason people can tune stuff out, or the reason we don't hear stuff, whether that's the whispers of God or whatever it is from like a scientific, real perspective and position. Your body just goes, don't need that one.
Yeah.
And in the same sense of training your eyes or whatever, you have to, in learning like you said, learning your love language with God, you have to work on it.
Yeah.
You have to understand that we're not just going to be able to, now for some people this is the case, like you can just sit down, be like, all right, God, speak, Lord, your
Send
servant.
me the license plate.
You speak, Lord, your servant is listening, I'm watching the road, where are the license plates? And it works. But I think for the vast majority of us, that's not the case.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind sharing that with you, because I'm like, how obviously perfectly designed, but it's just one of the ways that it like reveals to us the intentionality behind our relationship with God is immediately reflected in how well we think we can see and feel and hear Him. And it's like, if you're to make it something that probably everyone can relate to, if you're in a busy room full of people and everyone's talking, it's not the person shouting the loudest that gets the most attention.
Yeah.
It's the person who's dead silent and who's there listening and observing.
Yeah.
And then if, say everyone's in that room and all of a sudden some speaker gets up on stage, and so everyone gets quiet and they're asking questions. If the guy who was the loudest in the room raises his hand to answer, everyone's going to be like, all right.
Yeah.
If the guy who didn't say a word raises his hand to answer, every single guy or girl, every single person in that room is going to be like, oh shoot, he's going to say something. He hasn't spoken this entire time. And it's the reality of like, I'm not, some people are more extroverted than introverted, and so obviously it's a very individual thing. But the reality is, in order to grow closer and to build that relationship, we have to fine tune not only what we hear, but what we say.
Yeah.
And it all like, it builds. It's not just a go from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
It's step by step, and we have to learn it, and we have to grow to know it, and it's going to change. It's going to constantly be changing.
Yeah. It's like it's a muscle you have to exercise. My grandma always would tell us when we were younger, like, tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. And there's been studies like you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and I would imagine in like a digital world too, like we are the average of the content we consume, the ones we listen to, podcasts, movies, like radio, music, or what we see too, like what's scrolling on our Instagram feed, what's scrolling on our Facebook feed.
And I think because it's digital, people don't give it as much weight.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I know average of the 5 people I hang out with, like my brother who's really good, and like my friend who's inspiring, my dad. But what they spend 14 hours on here looking at is like not good.
Yeah. And we don't, like you said, we don't give it as much weight, but it still influences us. You think like, what's the, I mean, I don't know, you're sure, but maybe you saw it on an influencer and you bought it, like that influenced you, right? Or the way we talk.
It's actually a giraffe that was wearing it. It was the coolest stuff.
Or the way we talk. Like I've noticed some friends, if I haven't been with them for a while and they're with someone, like hanging out with someone else, they start to sound the same or they use the same words. Even like when I was an influencer, like my captions were pretty much the same as everybody else. What we consume is so important to who, and we have to be so picky and choosy and like curate our ears, like curate our minds, curate those moments in life so that you are consuming only beauty, truth, and good. And I've been trying to do that more intentionally, and just the way that I see the world now, like I've noticed things that I would never have noticed before, or just like
What a good feeling
it's
too.
So
when
good.
you pick up on that and you're like, 2 weeks ago I would have never thought of that. I would have never noticed that.
You would have never noticed it. And you see God's hand in everything. I think it might have been on your show when someone had mentioned, or it might have even been you, of like you were in a line or waiting for people, and it just like for whatever reason that thought sparked in your head of like God is in in every one of us. Like they are the image of God.
At work. Yeah.
At work. So it was I don't know if that was
yeah,
yours
no,
or
that's
not.
yeah, well, that's awesome. Yeah,
And
I was at a farmer's market.
I was at a farmer's market when this thought came up in my head after this. So it was like really hot, and it was almost to the end, and I was waiting in line to get these like really good almond cookies that they sell at the farmer's market here in Naples, and I was like losing my patience a bit. And I was just looking, like I was observing people, and that thought that you said crossed into my head, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so true. But I would see every smile or every gesture or every like little movement they would make, and I was like, oh my gosh, like that's Jesus in them. And it's just like, you think it's such a beautiful way to live your life. Just recognizing that beauty and hearing it, or I mean, whatever it is, like even in fragrance, like I'm sure you can train your nose to filter out good, bad, and everything. So, yeah.
Working in labs, I learned very quickly to drown out the scent of a lot of stuff.
Yes,
as we did a lot of projects and dissections, and we had probably the worst one. This is completely random, but we had a manatee that was brought in, and unknown cause of death, and we had to figure it out. But you have to dismember the entire animal.
Oh yeah.
And he'd been, he hadn't been dead long, but he's a manatee. He's, seafaring little guy. He wasn't little, he was huge. And the first step is actually to decapitate it.
Okay.
And so, well, he was very long dead. It was actually, just if it makes you feel any better, there's a little manatee. So this was at a marine laboratory, and there was a little manatee angel up on the wall.
Oh, okay.
So everyone that was brought in, it was like. But yeah, the moment you start, it's just all the scents and whatnot. So you definitely the tangent.
I'm sure there's a filter system.
Tangent, but yes, 1,000%. Because you're talking about the importance of the influences and really having built on that. And actually, one thing, just to go back to the noticing in the farmer's market line, what an incredible, I don't know how it happened for you in the line, but when I was at the farmer's market, we were working there, it was like flick of a switch. In one moment, it went from just doing, the work, to then all of a sudden, I was like, the flower on that lady's dress, the way that guy's hair is, that bird, this.
Yeah.
Like, it was all of a sudden, and I actually had fun with it. I recognized it for a second, which, like, thank you, Holy Spirit. But I recognized, I was like, wait a second. And so I pretty much stopped what I was doing and started to look at everyone. I'm like, okay, what do I see in you? You, what about you and you?
Yeah.
And it was so cool.
Oh, it's so cool. And it's just like, like I totally forgot about like having to wait in line or like in the heat or
It's
I
not
have
forced,
my dog.
like-
Yeah, it's not it's just like it made it brought so much beauty to the moment, and just being able to recognize like there's like Jesus is in them. Like they are made in his image. That little like there was this woman and she had this little twitch in her smile, and I was like, that's Jesus, like letting us know like to have a good day. And yeah, it totally, when you view it through that lens and you start to curate and like consume only truth, beauty, and good, like your life will only bring you goodness and joy.
That immediately made me think of, and I think it's one of those verses that we all know, but we just don't think about enough. And I say we all know it, but here I am, I'm not going to be able to recite it. But it's the one where like everything that is good, everything that is gracious, kind of like focus on these things.
Yeah. It's like everything that's true, everything that's lovely is one of the lines. I only know that because it's my last name. But yeah, I know which one. I think it's Philippians something, but I'm not.
It rings true
Yeah.
from one-on-one conversations to the type of content you consume to all of it.
Yeah.
And it's just, is there one thing aside from Aspen and Oliva, obviously, but one source of content on some sort of social media or podcast or books or anything, is there one or two or even three that now you're like you really are invested in, or that like this is your go-to?
Oh, that's a good question. I am definitely an old soul.
Okay.
So I love books.
Okay.
So a lot of the
There's nothing wrong with
content that I
books.
consume is like reading related and book related. And
Yeah.
I love magazines. I just love the visuals of magazines. But what I've really been getting into the past couple years is autobiographies. And I think those have brought me a lot of inspiration, growth, and even like reading like the lives of the saints, which they're obviously not all of them are autobiographies, but someone else is telling this story. But you're able to live and walk with this person through their life, and oftentimes when we're writing, like that is the most, speaking of authentic, like that is the person, that is the most raw of the human being that you can get, is when they're writing these things. And so you're really like walking this journey, whether it's someone who owns a business or someone who went through, I don't know, they like designed something like I love architecture, so I get a lot of inspiration from that. So like an architect or like athletes, they have really good autobiographies too. Or the lives of the saints are really powerful because the saints are just ordinary people. There's so much, I think they're easier to relate to sometimes when you're reading about them because they lived like the everyday lives that we did. So that's a lot of the content I consume now. My social media is like I'm very selective now on who I follow.
Yeah.
I'm very selective of podcasts.
Doesn't it feel good?
Oh yeah. It's like this liberation. I was telling my spiritual director, like I think it's that freedom that God wants for all of us. And like certainly it was hard, and there were people that I had in my life that I had to let go of. And that was difficult. There were some, obviously like challenges with that, but they weren't helping me grow. They weren't bringing me closer to Christ. If anything, they were pulling me farther back. But now, every time, I rarely log on to Instagram or like social media. Now it's like, I mean, not really. It's still like twice a day, but less than what I was.
Right.
But like when I look now, the people that I see or what I see, like what I'm consuming is things that are either inspire. Like I have 3 caveats you have to meet. You have to either inspire me, educate me, or somehow help me grow and bringing me closer to Christ.
That's why you don't follow our show. No, I'm kidding.
No, I do.
I'm kidding,
I was going to say, I do. I'm pretty sure I do.
I'm just totally messing around.
I follow Guadalupe.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I think, and you'll understand, actually, you probably have a better insight than I could hope for because of the psychology background. But there's a part of it too when, if you're someone who sat down and you're like, all right, I figured it out, I need to stop. Today, I need to unfollow a bunch of these accounts because I know it's not healthy for me. There's a massive part of that as you're doing it, the devil's advocate chirping in your ear, being like, you don't really have to do this. Like, why? You think like it's gonna makes that much of a difference?
Yeah.
And it's not just like I'm moving towards something good. There's like a legitimate challenge in closing off all that stuff.
Yeah. It is. I mean, no, really, there is. It's hard. I mean, especially if you've been consuming it for so long. In a weird, and maybe this is like a bit dramatic, but like you feel like part of your little identity or day is like you just unfollowed that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's challenging, especially if it's people that you know personally. There are going to be some hurt feelings there maybe, and you mend those, you know, as appropriate. I would say I mean, this has been a period of like a year and a half of me like starting to really be intentional and curate the things in my ear and in my eye and like training those muscles. And it's much easier as you go. Initially, it is really hard, especially because we live in a world where like everyone is sharing this and I also think like I have curating what I see and training my eye and my ear, like I've learned more about myself and I've been able to like step into who I am. And I was telling my spiritual director, like, I feel like I know who I am. And now I'm 28 and I'm like now 28, like finally, like I like unapologetically am who I am. Yeah. And like I feel like I know myself better than I've ever known myself. And it's because I'm allowing myself to grow in those areas that I'm meant to grow in, or like master and craft those skills that God gave me, or use the inspiration that actually inspires me and not X and X, right?
And the closer you get to that real version of yourself, like knowing who you are, like I am Natasha, I actually know the things that in a life-giving way that love and inspire me and encourage me. The closer you get to that, again, it's a process to get there. But I noticed in my life too, then it becomes easier
so
to just be like, nah,
I'm just like, okay,
no,
whatever,
done, gone. Be like, so scrolling through and be like, oh, yeah, no, I don't need that.
Or change this, like on the way here, I was listening to the radio and like, I really didn't even have to listen to too many lyrics to know like, okay, nope, gone.
Next one.
And it was so easy.
And it feels great.
It feels great. And then I turned on a country music station and life was good again.
You're like, this is brilliant. This is what I wanted to hear.
Yeah. And I think like, back to what you were saying, like the more you know yourself, the more you know God. Yes. And that, I mean, it's just been like such a powerful season in my life these past several years. And I think, but the more you know God, the better you are able to translate that and let other people come and get to know him through, you know, the beauty of the show that you're doing and bringing people, or just, I mean, you know, your actions. I'm much more of an action person than a words person, right? And like we said in the beginning, like people know if you're being authentic or not. And in a world where unfortunately like there's a lack of authenticity oftentimes, probably not here at Ave Maria, but in like other places, you can point out and pinpoint that person who knows exactly who they are. And like you said, you can spot them like a needle in a haystack. Yeah. And that person is so captivating. And when they captivate you, use that to then lead them to God. You know? It's
one of those, reflecting on the 2 commandments that Jesus reiterates in the New Testament. Love the Lord your God over everything else. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And I don't know what it was, but I was watching this thing and it broke it down and it was like, all right, so first one's pretty clear. Love God. Yeah. Can't really go wrong with that one. Yeah. Second one, take a second to think about it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, there's a reason that goes 1, 2. You know, gotta love God first. Otherwise, you know, if you're not connected to love, period, then you can't lowercase love anything or anyone. Yeah. But love thy neighbor as thyself. And so you hear neighbor first, and so you can think, you know, a lot of times like you'll see it all over social media. People like, love thy neighbor, love each other. But a lot of times those same people really struggle with themselves. And love thy neighbor as thyself. If you can't love yourself, you can't possibly, you can try. And I'll be the first one to say I was definitely in that position, and I have been at different points in my life. It doesn't end well. At least it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
There's no good fruit that comes from that. Maybe good learning lessons, but if you don't love yourself, and the only way to love yourself again is by loving God. If you don't love yourself, you can't love other people. And in wanting to be one of the reasons I think authenticity is so obvious, like real, is because in the modern day, I'll say it this way, in the modern day search for authenticity, what everyone's doing online, and I think there's an estranged version out there where now I spend a lot of time on social media because of work, marketing, and so I just see a lot. I observe a ton. I don't really. I post Instagram stories, but I haven't done a post in like months or something. But I observe a lot. And I think people are searching, they're almost searching for their authenticity.
Yeah.
And so they will share pretty much anything.
Yeah, when you see all those little story things.
Well, and not necessarily, I'm not so worried about people, because honestly, I have long stories too.
Oh, no, that's so sorry.
No, you're totally good. You're totally good. But that is very true. Like people will, someone goes to like a friend's house and there's 47 stories and it's like, hold on, just enjoy the time. But the topics of what people talk about, I think it's people are like, oh, I'm searching, this is authentically me. And there's a search for that authenticity, and the way I think people have fallen into doing is just by purging, like whatever they think about, talk about, let it all out. But that it oftentimes leads to just a deeper, darker hole, because you're not loving yourself.
Yeah.
Like the reason it's an interesting. I'm not a psychologist, but I love the dynamic and trying to learn and understand how people think.
Digital marketers are psychologists, I like to think.
Some extent,
to some extent.
I'll
You
take
know
that.
a lot more
I'll
about
take
me.
that. Thank you. But it's realizing that like without God and without being connected to that source, any other version of identity, any other version of authenticity, no matter how raw you think, because people can be raw and inauthentic.
Yeah.
And so no matter how raw you think you're being or authentic, if you're not connected to the source, then you can't be authentic.
Yeah. I totally. And I think to what you were saying is that you really can't get to know who you are until you know God. So it goes back to that two-way street of communication, and it is a journey. It's not like one day you wake up and you're like, oh, I know exactly who I am.
Great, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, I would. I wish. Wouldn't it save us all a lot of time and bring us all a lot of joy? It's a journey, and like enjoy the journey of getting to know yourself. You're not going to get to know yourself by expressing everything to the outside world. Knowing yourself comes from pulling back and silence and listening, and just like the best advice that I can give to people is like, step back in the morning and carve out 10 minutes and just sit with God and ask him that question of like, what do you desire from me? And even if you don't hear, when I started my 19th annotations, it was like a period of 2 weeks, and I would tell my spiritual, I hear nothing. I hear nothing.
I'm trying, but.
And he was like, just wait. And just maybe it's in a day, 2 weeks, 2 months, but give yourself the time and set a date with yourself every week or every day to get to know yourself and get to know God.
Gotta fine-tune yourself.
Yeah, gotta
I love that.
filter.
No, amen. We're coming up on our time.
Sure.
But before we go, I got one question for you. Is there a characteristic that you see in somebody you would acknowledge as living their best life, or are you that you think is prime, is key, and that like you want to emulate, and you would think, you'd suggest to people as well?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. I think so we've talked a lot about authenticity, so I won't say that one, but I think being obsessed with intentionality, like I think every leader, not even just the leader, but every person that I've encountered who I see is truly living to their potential and in service to others and creating those ripples, they're always so intentional with their words, their actions, when they speak, when they don't speak, how they carry themselves, what they do. And that again comes with like getting to know yourself, but I think that characteristic of being super intentional with, again, what you consume, what you don't consume, who you spend your time with, is really important.
And I think in a practical sense, that's something that people, even if you're not super spiritually in tune or trying to figure that out, you can do that today. You can practice that now. The next thing you're going to do, be intentional about it.
Yeah.
And if there's not a specific reason leading to a specific end goal,
Yeah, I totally. And you owe it to yourself. Like, you owe it to yourself to live a life of joy. Like, God wants you to be happy.
Yeah.
And that intentionality, like, will bring you that joy, and it will help you bring you closer to Him. Yeah.
What better way to end than
No
closer
better
to
way
Him,
to end.
right? Well, thank you so much, Natasha,
thank
seriously,
you.
for sharing the time and for sharing your story with us. Massive thank you to Guadalupe Roastery, as well as the entire team at Maria Vision. Thank you for tuning in so much, and we will see you guys at our next episode.